Welcome to the Sporting News Fantasy Source Baseball Podcast. My name is David A. Arnott, sitting here with Brad Pinkerton, and it's a new season. You get the inaugural Fantasy Source Baseball Podcast.
I'm really excited about it. We're not out of January, but to me it's baseball season already.
Indeed. I mean, once again, we must bring up the greatest headline ever written in the New York Times, which is pitchers and Molinas are just around the corner. So, and for our purposes, we're already preparing for our drafts. We're already thinking about it. So we're going to do a series of preview shows, talking about different positions and what you should be looking for along there. And today, we're going to be starting with the first baseman. Obviously, let's start with the top of the list. I don't think there's any doubt about who the top first baseman is anymore. I mean, even after last year's National League MVP, I don't think there's any doubt, but you might have something different to say about that.
No, for fantasy purposes, Albert Pujols is still the headliner of this group. Its first base is deep, very, very deep once again. And there's going to be the thought that, maybe you can pass on Albert Pujols if you have that number one pick. Go with a Hanley Ramirez to fill out a scarce position, and then you can grab someone just as comparable, to Pujols in the second or third round. Well, there is no other Albert Pujols. You got some other guys that are getting close, like the Joey Vottos, and you got Miguel Cabrera. These are the cream of that crop, but those guys are also going to demand an early first-round pick. So when you have a chance to get them, I say you take them. I
mean, one of the things that makes Albert Pujols so great, even just from a fantasy perspective, I'm not even talking real-life baseball where he outstrips everyone because he's also such a great fielder, but in fantasy baseball, you might even be able to say with fair confidence he's going to get around 10 steals on the year for you. I mean, foot problem, plantar fasciitis aside, guy does that year after year after year. And at first base, especially when you're gathering a few extra steals here or there, that's really valuable.
He can move.
Next tier down, we've got, you mentioned Cabrera, you mentioned Votto. Let's start with Votto. He had that monster season last year. Where do you see him going this year? Even if it's just in a general sense.
Right. I see him repeating what he did. In theory, he could get a little better. I think that's being overly optimistic. He could also drop a little bit. I'm not expecting a huge decline. I'm expecting Pujols-like numbers out of him, and those two battling for MVP honors again.
And then Miguel Cabrera. I mean, those two guys are the young guys. When Albert Pujols, sorry. No disrespect. If Albert Pujols ever declines, those two guys, they've got to be next in line to take over the crown of best first baseman alive.
Right. I think Cabrera has a great argument right now. The only thing that, to me, gives Votto and Pujols an advantage is those extra steals that they chip in, and Cabrera doesn't do that, but he is one of the best pure hitters in the game. And I think he gets underrated a lot in fantasy drafts.
I mean, one of the things about Cabrera that I love is that he does have that potential to hit well over 300 in a way that the other sluggers of his ilk don't necessarily do. I mean, and it's already kind of amazing that he gets those home runs and that run production in that ballpark, and not necessarily with the greatest lineup around him too.
He's still young, and he just recently committed himself to getting better, and that's scary.
Yeah, I mean, after those guys, now we start getting into the territory of Ryan Howard being one guy who you can pretty much say is a sure thing, but then after him, I don't know how many guys out there that you think are going to be like that you say for sure, yeah, gotta grab that guy. At this point, I feel like the talent level is really starting to flatten out, and like you say, a lot of people might have that attitude about Pujols at the top. That's not true. I agree with you on that point. But once we get down to this level, now we can start saying like, okay, this one guy's like the other.
Exactly. I wouldn't say there's a huge talent drop off, but as far as consistency, reliability, those factors. Now you're starting to talk about the Ryan Howards. You've got Justin Morneau. I think he's going to be underrated because of that concussion, assuming he's still healthy and is going to start the season on time. Prince Fielder, his power is going to bounce back. So you can get these guys for a very good discount. And they're most likely not going to produce numbers like Pujols, like Cabrera and Votto. But they have that ability. It's just a matter of whether you catch them on the right year.
Well, you mentioned Morneau. Let's talk about another guy who suffered an injury last year and was having a great season, Kendry Morales. Mm-hmm. Now, do you put him in that same sort of general category where you basically think to yourself, okay, I mean, he's no different than Aubrey Huff? Or do you think that he really is like how would you differentiate these types of guys who have that kind of question around them? Because I mean, I look at Morales and I say to myself, he was having a great year, freak injury. It's not like it's a chronic thing as far as I understand. Shouldn't I kind of expect him to go into the next season doing the same basic stuff?
Absolutely. As long as he comes into spring training and proves his health immediately and doesn't show any ill effects for missing so much time, then you have to consider him almost as a sleeper among the elite first basemen. Now, once we left out Mark Teixeira's name of that elite group, when you start talking about the Howard, Fielder, you have to think about Morales there. Once those big names are gone, he's there. And look at his numbers, what he did in just half a season last year, on top, following up that tremendous season in '09, and I'm pretty confident that he will bounce back around into form very quickly.
And if we can, we're getting down near the bottom of the 12 first basemen that will likely be taken in your draft. I think we've already named about 12 guys that you would even be considering. Of course, you might use first baseman as a go further, utility player, go farther down the list there. Where do you think Adrian Gonzalez falls into all of this? He's another huge name that changed teams. He's going from Petco Park, which is, if not the most inhospitable to hitters, it's right there with any of the worst ballparks in the game, to Fenway, which also is not necessarily hospitable to left-handed hitters.
Well, he could vault into that Pujols, Votto, Cabrera range very quickly. I think you will see some people, especially Red Sox fans, they will be drafting very highly, and they could be rewarded. I'm not going to present an argument against drafting Adrian that high, because you look at the numbers. He had 40 home runs in Petco. Now you're putting him in Fenway. It's not so much the right field section that I'm caring about. He can hit the ball to any part of the park. If he wants to go over the left field, over the monster, he can do it. So in that lineup, in that ballpark, that offense, he's going to put up some pretty sick numbers.
Now, in order to wrap up, just give us a couple guys that you would say, all right, sleeper type guys, the guys that you're saying, you know what, you think that the general public is underrating going in. You already mentioned Morales and Morneau, guys coming off of injuries. Are those your top two guys? Is there somebody else you're thinking of?
Those would be top two. And another injury bounce back guy, Derek Lee. He was battling through a thumb injury last year. Kind of went underreported, and he had that corrected this offseason. So he could be back to form, and that's just great value, veteran value in the late rounds you can get and plug in your CI spot. And also, looking at youngsters, I like Gabby Sanchez. He looked good. Ike Davis. Those two I see taking another step forward this year, and they could be very, very good value as backup first baseman. The guy
that I look at and see, and I salivate and start thinking, oh my gosh, what's going to happen now that he's changed teams? Adam Dunn. I mean, the guy, when he has a terrible batting average most years, it seems like. But I think it's every 4 years or so, the batting average gets up near 270. I think he had 1 year where it was 280, and that makes him monstrously valuable, because when he's down around 240, it just hurts you too much. I mean, you don't really want to put up with it. But other than that,
the two best parts of Dunn is his power, and you know what you're getting. Just don't expect above 260, and you're going to get about 40 homers.
All right, Brad. Well, thanks for joining us on the initial Fantasy Stars Baseball podcast.
Thank you, Dave.
All right, we're going to do this again next week.